Welcome to the Pat Life Podcast. I'm Patrick, and today we are going to dive into Christopher Nolan. I have some thoughts and opinions that I will be bringing to the table, um, some could it be's, and I definitely was starting to become more and more interested in this conversation or this train of thought, basically. After hearing some movie breakdowns, specifically with the Batman ones with BB, and it just got me thinking because I, really enjoy those movies. I really enjoy Christopher Nolan as a director. I wanted to understand why and why he's become such a big name, and just more so, just got me thinking of knowing how people get brought into the limelight. Why is it that certain directors, certain actors, certain influencers get put into the limelight compared to others? And we'll go on that today. But ultimately, I have my own theory, alleged, in regards to him in the world we're living in now and what role he might be playing. So I can't prove any of this, but today I'm going to break it down and just give a little backstory and kind of bringing all the pieces together and understanding storytelling, as well as the person that I've gotten from the information about him. So before I do all of that, I want to just real quick break down who I am and what I do, and the fact that, hold on one sec. Um, the fact that a lot of people don't obviously know who I am, that's fine. But I've spent 12 years of my adult life working on creating films, storytelling. And I've written, I'm trying to think, I've probably written, well over a dozen shows and short films and sketches, 2 dozen probably. And then I've written in full probably like 4 or 5 feature films. I've written plays. I've written and produced and co-produced and co-wrote a pilot for a TV show. I've written my own pilots and episodes thereafter. I've written spec scripts for It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Not that it got bought, but we wrote them and presented them. I've wrote an animated film that I pitched to Nickelodeon out in California. So I've been doing this for a long time, and I'm always working on how I could become a better scriptwriter, and understanding the psychology of people and how their interactions with one another. So it's not that I'm someone who just likes watching movies and not really understanding this world. And the reason why I go into this much depth is because it's important to understand that when you're telling a story, you need to really be thinking of all the pieces. And someone like a Christopher Nolan, who goes into these metaphysical ideas and the study of knowledge. I forgot how do you say it? Epistemology, something like that, where it's understanding what is knowledge, what is the mind. He really goes in. Him and his brother John or Jonah go into a lot of that in their films. So you have to really understand how to bring people into those worlds, and it's a challenging thing when you're literally creating worlds from nothing. But the importance of me going into all that is I just want you to know that I'm coming from somebody who's created a lot, and I understand that world. And one thing that I also want to try to do today is talk about things that we know, things that we can know, and how we can then bring that to ultimately the opinion or the theory that I'm going to present. So the first thing that we have learned and has been talked about through multiple references is, first off, who is Christopher Nolan? Christopher Nolan was born in England. He's also has a he's a citizen as well in America. And it's important to understand, though, that he grew up in Highgate, London, which is a really, really wealthy area. He also grew up in Chicago in a town called Evanston, Illinois. And I also know, because I'm from Chicago, I grew up in a town called Downers Grove, Illinois, which it's an up and coming town, definitely. But Evanston is a very, very nice neighborhood. So already we can deduce the fact that, okay, his family grew up with a lot of money, or they've had some sort of wealth financially. Why is that important? It's not just that money buys you things. It's also understanding that money and wealth also brings a lot of connections. And we'll go into that here soon. But understanding, okay, he's somebody who has grew up with that type of family income, as well as having that connections. His dad um, worked as a creative director for an advertising marketing company. So what else is that saying? Okay, well, this gentleman, his father, I think Brandon Nolan, knows how to sell people. What the psychology of people, what are they selling? I can't speak with certainty, but if you're a successful, wealthy man working in advertising and being a creative director, clearly you know what you're doing. So that gets then passed on to your children. This is it's something that whether or not you're doing it directly or indirectly, they're taking that in. They're seeing how you do your job, and they know how to then ultimately deal with the psychology of people. This is a learning tool that you see all the time. I mean, people who are musicians, their kids become musicians. They watch, they learn, they observe. They, for better or worse, they learn how to take on some of those skills. So already, clearly, there's some, in my opinion, some correlation to his past in understanding the mind at a young age. But I also do know from the interviews what they said that their dad traveled a lot, so there's that component as well. Clearly, he had connections in all over the world. So there's a lot of pieces that are already starting to show, kind of from what I've gathered through interviews that they've talked and I've read that there is that connection with understanding people's mindsets and the psyche. And one of the things that I read was that Christopher Nolan and his brother would be in Chicago during the summer. They'd watch all the movies and see it before other kids in other states or in England before it made it out there. So when they'd come back, that he would be able to tell them all about these movies without them seeing it because he basically got an early screening. And the reason why that's important is because he's already learning how to draw people in with storytelling, telling other stories, but drawing them in with the way he does it. And these are all important things to understand of someone who's now becoming one of the most high income directors of all time. And I bring up all these different pieces of his past because it's important to understand, thinking of our life as stories and characters, how people are getting brought into the story. What is their character? Literally, I'm a character as well. What is my story? And it's how do I play into it? And now when you're on that big stage, you made it there for a lot of people for a reason. And it's important to think, okay, why is it that when you think of actors, people can rifle off a ton of actors' names. But when you talk about directors, majority of people, they don't really know a lot of directors. Directors don't get as much of that attention. However, most people know Christopher Nolan, Quentin Tarantino. Who are some other ones? I mean, those are two of the big ones. I know obviously I'm spacing out here, but Christopher Nolan has that type of attention of people being able to be like, do you know any directors? Oh yeah, I know like Quentin Tarantino, like Christopher Nolan or something, because of his movies. And I always ask the question, how did they find their way to that place? What connections did they have? And so understanding that Christopher Nolan clearly had connections growing up. He was out going to prep schools. He was part of Jesuit private school. So there's all these, I don't want to say they're not gifts, but there's these what some would consider perks of having wealth is yes, it's being able to live a more luxurious life, but it is having connections, people investing in you. Some would call it grooming. I think it's just, in this case, I can't speak with certainty, but I think there's definitely an investment. And clearly he's very talented. He knows what he's doing. It's not a bash at all. But it's also, you have to understand how many directors come through people's doors, how many actors, how many people have the best story. And it's like, how do we invest in somebody? Because who are we going to take a chance on? who's also going to, based off of people who have the money, who's going to do what we want them to do, who's willing to do that. And these are things just to think about. So I go into all that because there's an interview that he had where they talked about his Nolan's uncle, supposedly named Tony something, worked for the Apollo space station mission. He worked with, in some regards, to the rockets, not necessarily building, but he worked there. And what he said in one of the interviews was that his uncle would send him footage of the lunar landings or some of the landings. And what Christopher Nolan would do is he said he would refilm them off the screen and then cut them in, thinking that no one would notice. Now, as I said before, certain directors find themselves in a position to catch people's attention. Talking about the lunar landing, talking about the Apollo missions, who comes to mind for the people who really know? Stanley Kubrick, famous director. Most people know at this point that Stanley Kubrick filmed what we would now consider the moon landing. There's a ton of evidence. There's people's testimonies, pictures, documents, all these things that show that he filmed it. I mean, you even hear in the song by the, what's their name, Red Hot Chili Peppers, they literally say in the line, space may be the final frontier, but it's made in a Hollywood basement. So as we talk about programming and things being expressed to people, that is one of those things that's been put in front of us all the time. Funny enough, BB will say that the module looks like a meth head's tree fort, and when you see it in person, or even just in pictures, your logic for most people will kick in and be like, how did that make it? Well, it didn't. As I said, Stanley Kubrick did film and directed what we would consider the lunar landing or the moon landing for the Apollo. So clearly, there's this push for us getting these programmings and needing to understand them. So you need somebody, no matter what it is, when there's an event that's taking place, there needs to be someone filming it. And you need someone with a vision that people can get behind. What also came out during the late 1960s, 2001 Space Odyssey. Now there's more to that I won't go into, but understanding that who directed it, Stanley Kubrick. So clearly, Stanley Kubrick at the time was the director. A lot of people wanted to work with Stanley. He had this, clearly he was building a rapport and building a stock of his films that was really doing well. It was getting points across that was needing to get across by the people who were paying. And what I find is interesting is back then there was that big push. They film, there's a lot of inconsistencies, the science, all these things don't match up. And then we say we can't go back for all these years because the technology is too painful to get back and we destroyed it all. We don't have it anymore. And there's always a reason. It's always budgets, but their budget's like over $50-60 million a day. All these different components. But what's interesting is right now what we're seeing is this re-push to go back to Mars, or going back to space, specifically maybe the moon. This constant, rocket launches onto the ISS and landing back. And we're seeing this over and over again. And it's being pushed into our minds, not just through the media storytelling, but also the movies, i.e. Christopher Nolan's Interstellar, The Martian by Ridley Scott, who I think, in my theory, they all come together here. But what I'm seeing, in my opinion, is we're seeing a reintroduction, pushing back into people's minds that we are going to be going to space, obviously. But it needs to come from it needs to be more realistic. Obviously, back then, the way it was shot clearly is not going to pass for today. So how it needs to be shot, it needs to live up to now what our minds perceive. Now, are they going to go back? No, because they never went. But I think, in my opinion, that this new push is going to be having Christopher Nolan, even Ridley Scott to some capacity. These are the guys who are going to be directing the next moon landing or the next mission to Mars. Clearly, they are both also very much, and I'm going to kind of sidetrack here, but talk about location scouting being an important part. More so Christopher Nolan, but he likes to use practical effects. What are practical effects? What you're seeing is really what's happening, and then only using green screens to support that. And those are things that he does very well. When you see a plane unhooked in the Batman movie, The Dark Knight Rises, that's a real plane that's hooked. Those are real. Those aren't special effects. That is a real effect happening. It's practical. And then why are those pieces important? Because people are catching on. People are seeing the CGI. They understand that even though, yes, CGI can look good, it's still, when it comes into our field, it's hard to process. It's hard to take in and see it as real because it's so foreign. So we need those practical effects. We need to be able to take those in and go, wow, that looks really real. That's why when they location scout, he likes to use, he himself has said, when they filmed Interstellar, they had to go to Iceland and find this ice, basically an ice wall that really matched what he was looking for, the vision he had. And they supposedly were searching. Um, you know, when you can do all these things like green screen, no, you want to go to the place. When you're someone who is a director who's really invested in making it look as real as possible, you're going to go to a place that really brings that to life. Now, if you're also going to places where there's not a lot of people who live, people may not know where it is. They might not know what they're seeing. It might feel like another planet because they've never actually seen those terrains. And where is that possible? Parts of Iceland for a lot of people, Greenland. Don't be fooled, guys. Just because a map shows that it's full of ice, that's not the case. But these are important pieces to understand because you have someone who's a practical director, practical effects, and then I'll go more into other pieces here later. But you have to understand that that brings the reality for a lot of people into it. And if you're really good at doing that with things that are so over the top, and you can't just do this on a green screen, that takes a skill. And people who are pushing agendas, getting things out there, wanting people to fall for these spells, they need it to be move with the times, be realistic, because as more and more people are starting to see that, hey, we're not on this spinning globe, we're not moving at 1,000 miles an hour through this whatever you would call it, I forget the name of it, but you're not revolving around the sun. All these components, people need, the people that they're still trying to keep invested, they need to do something that's going to step it up, because once people stop believing a lie, it's lost its magic, it's lost that spell that it's casted on people. So I believe that now you have a director who is specific to now making films, Interstellar, talking with NASA, having an uncle who worked at NASA, who he supposedly was taking his own footage of the landing, which questioned, why would NASA allow, or even this uncle, allow him to have that footage? If this is of a landing on the moon or lunar footage, why would a kid have it? And now knowing that this kid took that footage, supposedly spliced it, put his own stuff in there to see if anyone would notice. If it's a backup copy, I don't know. But based off of what I'm reading, he's taking footage and doing his own thing with it. Why would if using logic here, why would anyone give that type of information to a kid? Think about that for a second. That caught my attention. And it was in his wiki. I cross-referenced it with the article that it was in. So clearly, if they're saying this, then at some point it must have happened to some capacity. Why would anybody give that type of supposed just memorabilia, just literally the changing of the world we live in at that time, the minds of people, the wonder? Why would they give that to a kid and then ultimately not paying attention to what he's doing with it? And he's supposedly making his own movies and cutting it. Think about that for a second. That already right there is like, wait, something's not right there. So he has clearly already a connection with NASA. He's got connections, obviously, when he's made himself famous in his movies, doing Interstellar, having those interactions with people at NASA. Talking about practical effects, we know that NASA does these underwater trainings. They have videos, interviews, documentary things related to showing you them underwater, where you're seeing what it looks like the International Space Station underwater. And the water is very clear, very blue on the walls. Why is that? Well, a lot of these photos, this footage that we're supposedly getting, is happening underwater. You've seen in the videos of the people in space working on the space station where you see the bubbles coming out. People will say, no, that's not true. This is all edited. How do you know? Well, I know that they do underwater. They do underwater training. And I've seen bubbles come up. I've watched the interviews. They've openly talked about it. I also know that they say, oh, this is a great place to do training because it mimics what's in space. However, when you're underwater, there's this pressure happening here. In space, the pressure is going out. So it's actually quite the opposite. How does that match? There is none. They also need to put people in those suits. They need to drop them in because they can't maneuver in the water. They need it. They need to have the pressure tubes. They need all these different pieces just to supposedly train underwater to match what's in space. Now, if you're in space and you have 14, 10, whatever many people helping you, don't think that's actually going to mimic what you're going to be like when you're out in space, unless you're really not out there. And what we've seen is people have demonstrated, Dave Weiss from DITHR, DITRH, Dearth, Down the Rabbit Hole, showing how they've used the green screens. And they've openly said it. They've talked about these things. It's just whether or not we're entertained and in that mindset where we're being in a suggestive state, not paying attention to the details. So I go into all this because clearly at a young age, he's had connection with NASA. He has a family that's wealthy. They clearly have, and they're in America as well as in England. So they're doing well in multiple places. The dad travels a lot. They said he was always traveling to all these countries. So clearly there's connections happening. I don't know to what extent. I can't tell you, but I do know that they obviously have connections. So, and then also obviously that he made a movie right before this whole big rush to go back to space in 2014, Interstellar. Now, this isn't negating any of his skills and stories. I still think he's an amazing storyteller. I think his scripts are fantastic. So this isn't, as I said, negating any of that. It's just starting to think, well, what role is he playing right now in our world of entertainment? It's a big role. One of the things that people need to understand is, how do I know his impact on people? And how I know is by money. And I know this because as I said, created my own scripts and writing. What you do is once you want to pitch to somebody, you need to create what's called a pitch deck. And in that pitch deck, you have to have a lot of different pieces, because essentially what you're doing is you're saying, hey, I know you don't necessarily have time to read the whole script, but here's a bunch of just cliff notes, things that you need to make it look good, you need to make it look pretty to get somebody to actually look it through. And if they really like what they're seeing and all these things start to matter, then they might read the script, or they'll have obviously what they call ghosts, like script readers. They'll read it, and then they'll go up the chain. And if it gets to enough people, then they'll have an executive or somebody be like, hey, you need to read the script. But how often does that happen? I can't say. Usually you have, again, connections. It's all about who you know. It's about connections. So I go into all this because one of the things that you need to do in a pitch deck is you need to do a comparison of, okay, what type of movie, what genre do I have? What is the genre's income? What is the annual income? What are some movies that have done really well? What is your movie like, similar to, and how do they do in the box office? Because if you have a movie that you're pitching and you're like, oh, it's like these movies, but you look and it made no money, they don't care. They don't care how good your story is, because they're looking at numbers. They're like, yo, dude, if this is the money that you're saying this made, this is terrible. We don't want this movie, because no one wants to watch it. There's no desire for it. And unless it's something that they want to push into people's minds, get people to watch, then they're not going to waste their time. They're not even going to read it. So I go into all this because from his movies, Christopher Nolan has made movies. His first movie that really did well was called The Following. It was like an independent film he made on his own with his friends. That's another thing. Supposedly they made it on like 3,000 euros. It's a feature film. So that's a feature film, very, very cheap. They said that he's very diligent. Everyone who's been on set says he's very diligent. So he's always rehearsing, making sure the scenes look really good, really making sure they're appropriate so you're not wasting time. They said he's very efficient. Start at 7, you end at 7. That's another thing that people look for is this person going to waste my money? If you invest, let's just say $1 million on a director, and your budget is $1 million, and okay, after you paid your actors, you get your director, your director of photography, you get all these people, you have your crafts, you have to think of every little thing, costumes, all these things. Say you spent $600,000, you have another $400,000 for production, and then sometimes even post-production, add the cost together. When you get somebody who is constantly going over budget or going over time, let's say you're shooting 7 to 7, and then now all of a sudden it's 7:01. Well, I think it's every 15 minutes or sometimes hour you go over, you have to pay everybody who's union time and a half, which is a lot of money. So when you have on set, you'll have a line producer, you'll have sometimes, yeah, mostly line producers or, associate producers might be on set, making sure that everything's running smoothly, because the minute they start going to overtime, that's a lot of money that they're losing. So you get a director who's efficient and is saving you money or working within the budget and doing it well. Think about, people see that, they go, that is somebody we want to do stuff for us. And I know this might not seem like it connects, but you have to understand, when NASA is spending whatever $50 million a day, that is not being diligent. That is not being efficient with their money. And these are things that I'm bringing to the table as my assumption, or I allegedly believe that he will be filming or have some role in this next Mars landing, moon landing, which everyone's talking about. Because not only does he know how to shoot practical effects, but he's also very, again, time saving, money saving, giving the people who are spending the money what they need. And it's ultimately what they need is people's attention. They want people entertained. They want to pull people into what they're doing. But they also, if they can save a lot of money, then they're going to be very, very happy. And that's another important aspect of it. And I go into this because when he started with that movie called The Following got him on track. He made it for 3,000 euro. His next film was a feature, well, it was an indie film called Memento, which was like a $4 million budget. And it did super, super well. So they made a ton of money on that one. And the story was really good. It was very unique. So understanding this process, he has now made through all of his movies. He's very selective with his movies, and there's reasons. I can't know all of them, but he's made over $5 billion in just theater sales. Think about that. When you're doing a pitch deck in your movies, obviously, you get to a point where you're fishing with your money and you're now making over $5 billion in just sales. That's not including memorabilia, that's not including products, clothing. All these things start to really add up. And he does such a good job at being savvy with the money or the time and making sure they work within what they have. So think about that, $5 billion for 10, 12 movies, maybe. That's a lot of money. And also think about those movies. Think about $5 billion. That means how many minds went and paid their money to take in what was being shown, the story. That's a lot of people. So if you think about that, each ticket's about $20. That's going to come out to a lot. And that's not including the people who might have gotten them on DVDs and watched them only from a DVD. They didn't go to the theater. So there's a lot of minds being brought in and engrossed by this man's films. And you look at money because that's what people are literally paying to go see it. It's not a company investing in somebody. This is people's hard-earned money that they're going, I'm going to give this to you so you can entertain me. And think about that. That's just in those sales. There's a movie specifically, the Memento movie, that was done in India or in the Middle East called Gajini. I'm probably mispronouncing it, but that movie alone, it's just Memento in another country, basically, made $2.32 billion. So think about not just the money, but the amount of people who spent their money in the minds that are now taking in these stories. So clearly there's an attraction to him. So he's bringing people in. Okay, clearly that amount of people brought in, what is he then saying? What is he possibly saying that's going to bring that many people's minds in? Well, this is where we get into what he was into. His dad being the creative director for advertising, understanding people's minds, the psyche, those who've seen his movies, understanding people's psychological states, their emotional attachments. And he does a really good job of bringing all these pieces together. And we'll go into those in a second here. But the one thing that I would want to talk about, let me find it real quick. So he and his wife, Emma Thomas, have a production company called, I believe it's, I don't know how it's pronounced, Syncope, SYNCOPY .inc. So Syncope.inc. So the Inc. is incorporated. So ultimately that means it's now within the corporate realm. Their company is now corporatized. They are within the dead corpus. Dead. It's not alive. So, but then what does it mean then for syncope? Now, the sins, S-Y-N, sign, son, has to do with together, forces, plenty, sometimes troops, wealth. And then there's that with, as I said, that with together, and copy, copia, cornucopia. So that's abundance, essentially. So you're dealing with an abundance of together within the dead. I don't know if I'm necessarily pronouncing it right, but you're dealing with an abundance, a lot of whatever it may be, dealing within the dead. So just breaking that down is something to think about. Why would you name your company that? Everything has purpose. Every movie you see and the moments and the scenes in his life that we're experiencing through those movies has purpose. Why does his production company, the name of it, have any difference? It doesn't. There's a purpose for it. I can't say specifically why, but I do think that's interesting. Syncope, SYNCOPE, in medical terms, means it's a temporary loss of consciousness caused by fallen blood pressure. So I saw that and I was like, that's interesting. Very close, very similar. What does that mean? What is his movies? Is there any sort of connection there? Well, his movies have a lot to do with the mind, the consciousness, the conscious mind. Inception. Let's go into the subconscious, 5 layers of the subconscious, implant an idea. When you are now at a temporary loss of consciousness, you are in what's called, as we said, you dropped in blood pressure. What's happening? Your body is closer to death. When you have a huge drop in blood pressure, like when you stand up really quick and you lose that blood pressure, that's part of it. But what else causes it? There's also a huge attack, or not attack, but a drop in the process of the endocrine system, the adrenal glands, as we've talked in other videos. When you have constant fear, you have this constant stress, anxiety, what you'll see with people is a disruption to the adrenal glands, a draining of the adrenal glands, which has a direct effect on the endocrine system, which ultimately has effect on consciousness. So if we can, in essence, affect people's conscious state by what they're getting, anxiety, fears, stresses, or whatever it may be, you can then affect their conscious state. You can affect them consciously. And as they said, syncope.inc, this abundance of us being within an abundance of the dead, or being in the dead, there's an abundance. So these are things I can't say with certainty, but breaking down the etymology of it, these are things to definitely keep in mind. Some things that were brought to my attention is him and his wife created this production company. Why did you name it that? What's the purpose? And maybe there's a reason that I haven't found, but just based off of that, I think it's very interesting. So where was I? I'm jumping around. Okay, cool. So these are, so we're getting into this metaphysical, his stories. They do very, as I said, the metaphysical, the epistemology, understanding, I said, the investigating, the justified beliefs from opinion. That's what it is. I have it here. So when we understand that his stories have a lot to do, as I said, with a lot of this time not being linear, i.e. the metaphysical. There's things happening within our reality, affecting our reality that we can't process, that we can't see, that our senses don't perceive, as well as as I said, the epistemology of investigating and justifying these beliefs from opinion. These are important because right now, going back to the moon landing, people are trying to, there's an investigation for a lot of people of being able to justify, is this just my opinion or something I've been told and therefore then I just believe it's true? Or is this a belief based off of true investigation, being like, I know this to be true? Because these are things that a lot of us have this fog with. We don't necessarily understand. We don't know. And we're trying to constantly figure out the world around us with all this confusion. A lot of us ignore these metaphysical things that are happening. As people have talked about, there's no such thing as a coincidence, but BB brought it up today and it was fantastic. And it's like a con incident, a coin incident. So it's something that's happening outside of us that's bringing us together with outside of our senses, and there's a reason for it. It's not just mishap. There's a reason. It has purpose. And all these things with the moon landing and dealing with people still holding on to that story is people can't let those things go. It's hard to let those go. As you see in Inception, there's a lot of those things in his subconscious that he can't let go. He's still holding on to, and you see some of these worlds crumbling because he can't let go. You see it in Memento, that this main character is trying to find his wife, the murder of his wife, and there's certain things he can't let go. They even talk in that movie about how your facts are different than what you believe, because what you think you know can change. Your perception can be off. There's certain things that are just facts, and especially in that movie, we'll get into it in a sec, but we're seeing that this is a common thread throughout his movies, him and his brother's movies. There's this time is not linear. They're telling us that time is not linear. We should pay attention to that. He's done it in multiple movies. He's done it in Memento. He's done it in Inception. He's done it in Interstellar. He's done it in this new movie Tenet. He's done it in sometimes in some parts of the Batman films. It's just the way he films it. So he's doing it in a lot of his movies of showing this nonlinear time. And I go into all these pieces and how this has to do with the moon landing, because when we see movies about space, you see that they talk about how time is so different out there. About like in Interstellar, there's like a tree growing, and as it's growing or the water's falling, it's for every day or week or whatever, it's 7 years that he's lost on Earth. So they're showing you that there's these two things happening supposedly at once, but the time itself is not linear. There's complete different times. And understanding that the world we live in now, that is very true. And I'm not going to go into it because I think it's hard for people to grasp, but it's drawing on people's emotions with that of saying, hey, these are things that are real. They're not just in space. And this is, I think, what's important for people to start paying attention when you watch movies, especially with someone like Christopher Nolan. They're going to tell you something, and you need to pay attention. And understanding that it's not just a movie, there are truths to that. But I missed a point. I'm going to go back talking about money. Sorry, I'm all over the place. It's a long day. As I said, these movies make a lot of money. And that's how we can tell their importance, how many minds they've affected. Now let's go to see how that also pertains to our everyday life. What do we know about the election, the 2016 election? During that campaign, supposedly, Trump made, or was it given, something along $2 billion worth of free advertising as his campaign went on. So thinking about this, as I said, people in high positions are not stupid. They know that they need to make money. They know what they're pushing, the powers that be, whatever they are, they're pushing something. So if you're giving $2 billion of free advertising for someone that you hate, that is not a smart move if you're using logic. Think about that. That's basically saying we want people to hate this person, so we're going to give him more airtime. Ultimately, what's happening is when you're giving that much airtime and that free money, what's really happening? You're getting people to have an emotional reaction to them. And you're paying for it, and you're willingly paying for it because your reasons. So when you understand that, now talking about our present day or 2016, Christopher Nolan made $5 billion of income off of these movies, a lot of these movies. In less than a year and a half, 2 years, or however long he was campaigning, Trump got $2 billion of free advertising. That's almost all the money, that's almost half of all the money that those Christopher Nolan's movies made worldwide. And he made that in free advertising. Just think about that. I know this is a side note, but understanding how the world that we live in isn't necessarily all the same. The reality is different for people. People see that and they go, oh, well, because he's so bad, and they need to let people know. Or they're all in it together. They're all working on the same team. As we've said, and I've said before in other podcasts, when you see actors and actresses who are villains, or they're fighting one another in these movies or these shows, and then you see the behind the scenes footage, or in interviews, they're best friends, they're laughing, they're holding, they're messing around. Well, clearly, oh, they're just acting. But what about when we see politicians and the people who are supposedly on these stages talking shit about each other, and then we see pictures of them together at dinners, and they're at banquet and events having speeches about one another and about how great one another is after they've already had their beef? What's the difference? For the public, what we see is the fight, the conflict separating us. And then you see, like, oh, these people are at these dinner parties, and it goes over a lot of our heads because the continuity there doesn't match the emotional reaction we had to the original conflict, if that makes any sense. So these are things that I just think are important to think about, and understanding that how easy it is for us to be in a suggestive state and not see some of these things. I mean, there's a lot of things that I still don't know, and I'm not pretending to know, but it's also part of the journey, as I said, to not be in the dead, to pay attention, understand, think for yourself, have logic. And if you don't know something, being able to go, I don't know, therefore I can look into it. I can use this. I can use my senses to make sense of it. Not lose consciousness, not lose perception through your senses to understand the world around you. And this is one of the big pushes that we're seeing. Obviously, there's all this other shit happening, but you're seeing in the news they're still trying to push launches. We're the only country that's ever been to the moon. They're saying other countries went, but their lander, destroyed before it landed, so they couldn't get footage. How convenient. All these things. How convenient are these things? And this is what's important going back to Christopher Nolan, is that now this guy has pulled in a lot of people, their minds, their attention, their suggestive state through his movies. Now, as we're pushing this space talk, what's going to happen? Just like Stanley Kubrick, they have to show something, because they can't just be on the fence. It's always that, it's like the person who's like, oh yeah, I'll pay for the debt that I owe. I'll pay you. I know I'm taking a lot from you, but I'll pay it. I'll show you. And the more they say that, people go, you're not paying. You're not going to do anything. Same thing with NASA. Dude, we're spending a lot of money on NASA. Well, no, we're gonna get somewhere. It's just funding right now. It's funding. We need more. This president said we don't, we need it. This next president said we don't need it, so they cut our funding. If you're saying we made it back then 12 plus times with the income and the money and the technology we had then, but we couldn't do it now, I ask you to really consider that. We have a much bigger budget now. A lot more money is being spent, and we still haven't gone. And the technology is too difficult to get back. Think about that. We're able to now land, supposedly, take it out into the ISS, land these rockets up there, and then have them come back and land on the platform again. And you're telling me we don't have the technology to go back? I see a lot of flaws in those claims. So, that all being said, I think there needs to be a solution where they need to show it. People need to see that we've gone, that all this hard energy, this hard work is paying off. But it needs to be, they need to sell it. Because this one is a lie that has been on the rocks for a while now, because a lot of people are waking up to this. So they need to be able to capture people's minds on this one. My opinion. I can't say with certainty, but based off of how much of there's a push in seeing that, specifically Christopher Nolan, how much he's doing, his stories that he's telling, talking about the consciousness of people, talking about the mindset being manipulated, being able to, test someone's morals. These are all things that have a lot, as much as you might not realize, have a lot to do with our world and how we perceive our world, and then our morals in that world. And there's a specific line, actually, I'm going to pull this up from, I don't know if you can see me still, but I don't know if you can see me. Let me pull this up real quick. There is a quote from his one movie called Inception. It's by Michael Caine, and it's a fantastic quote. It explains the world we live in right now. Let me just pull this up real quick. Sorry, give a sec. Oh no, wrong movie. Prestige. Sorry, I'm not prepared. My bad, guys. All right, so this movie, Prestige, is about magicians, literally magic. And what's happening in this movie? You have Christian Bale and Hugh Jackman, who become rival magicians, and they ultimately are trying to be the best magician. They're run by their ego, their greed, becoming the best. And there's a line that starts the movie that's a really powerful line. And I'm just trying to find it. And what happens is Michael Caine, oh, here it is right here. So Michael Caine starts the movie with this. So understanding movie storytelling, understanding Nolan's point. Why am I telling this? Why is he starting his movie with this voiceover and then leading into visual? Because he wants this to be the part that gets across the most. And this is the line. I'm just going to read it. Every great magic trick consists of 3 parts or acts. Think about this. The first part is called the pledge. The magician shows you something ordinary, a deck of cards, a bird, or a man. Unaltered, He shows you this object. Perhaps he asks you to inspect it to see if it's indeed real, unaltered, normal. But of course, it probably isn't. So this is what he's saying in this opening line. There's the pledge. And I don't know the deep down etymology of pledge, but what I'll understand, when you're pledging to something, you're giving your witness to, you're giving your energy to, you're making basically an, I don't want to say an offering, but you're saying like, hey, I'm putting my energy towards this. I could be wrong. People are going to break this down. That's fine. But ultimately, what's happening is that's what's happening. This person who is a viewer is now looking at someone who's doing a show for them. They're saying, hey, look at this. Look at this. This is all real, right? Look, put your hand in here. And people are now looking and checking. So as he said, but of course it probably isn't. The second act is called the turn. The magician takes the ordinary something and makes it do something extraordinary. Extraordinary. Now you're looking for the secret, but you won't find it because, of course, you're not really looking. You don't really want to know. You want to be fooled. But you wouldn't clap yet because making something disappear isn't enough. You have to bring it back. That's why every magic trick has a third act, the hardest part, the part we call the prestige. And the reason why I go into that is because now let's take this guy and his brother and a team, mostly them, made this film. It's based off a book, an earlier book. But they made this movie at a time. What are they saying? When you're watching magic, magic could be movie magic, it could be a magician, it could be just any, maybe a relationship, somebody's pulling one over you. But let's talk about movie magic here, television, mainstream media, all these things. These are magic. This is movie magic. They're showing us something that we want to see. And we want to, in this moment, we want to be invested. You're seeing in the news these harsh things that are happening. And a lot of times people go, how can this happen? I can't believe I'm watching this, but you can't get enough. You keep watching. It's like in those medieval movies and shows where you see people in the town square getting executed. They showed that was the thing to do. And people were watching. Oh, this is so heinous. How can I watch? But you can't turn away because in your mind, even though maybe people were really dying, it's just a matter of you want to be invested in something that you know is going to be extraordinary, or it's going to be out there, whether good or bad, heinous. It's just going to be like, whoa, that was insane, but I couldn't stop watching because for whatever reason. And then as he says, the second act is called the turn. They take something ordinary and they make it disappear, and now you're looking for a secret, but you're not. And this is what we're experiencing a lot today is that people don't want to know truth, because if they know the truth, it's going to unravel everything, and it's going to completely turn their life in the direction of having to think everything through again. What is real? And that's hard for people. It's sometimes easier just to be naive, or just to be, aloof to it, or just not know about it, or whatever. But this is the thing that they're saying in this movie, and by them I mean Christopher Nolan. He's saying, hey, look, we're going to show you something, and you're going to know in your heart, or you're going to know that this isn't real, but we're going to say, hey, this is a real rocket. Hey, these are real things. This is a real place. But then we're going to do something extraordinary. And you're going to be like, wait a minute, how did they do that? And you're going to be like, I want to know. I want to know what you did. But you really don't want to know. You want to be in that story. You want to be invested. All these people who, as I've said in the past, are you really emotionally attached to what you're witnessing and experiencing? Because if you are, and you're really, truly emotionally affected by it, then at least ask why. But a lot of us just want to be part of the story. You want to fit in. You want to feel like you're a part of what's happening. You want to feel heard. You want to feel, maybe not for some of you, empty. And if someone comes along and says, hey, all these things that you're having an emotional reaction to, just so you know, they're not really happening, or it's not happening the way you might think, that then takes you away from it. It takes you away from the magic. It literally disenchants whatever you're experiencing. And a lot of those enchantments are things that you then hold on to, that you want to keep feeling. And then, as he said at the end, the hardest part is the third act, the prestige. It's like alchemy. You take something, you break it down, you make it disappear into pieces, and then the hardest part is, hey, can we bring it back and unify it again? That's essentially what he's talking about in some capacity is alchemy. But he said the hardest part is the prestige, is bringing it back. Is also living in our everyday life. Let's talk about the moon landing. Is you're getting people who get brought in, then they get completely, well, how did that happen? Now you got to literally bring that shit back. That's the hardest part. Okay, it's easy to make it look like it went out into space, but how do we bring it back? But also understanding that the entire time, the magician is doing a magic trick. When we watch movies, we're watching movie magic. When you're watching space launches, you're watching cameras filming an event. We're watching multiple angles. We're watching quick shots. We're watching a lot of times old cameras. They're not HD, which is questionable as to why you have all this new technology, but you have old cameras that aren't up to date. So essentially, we're watching this experience from movie, from digital. And what ends up happening is then we go, okay, well, I saw it, therefore it happened. Not going, wait a minute, why did they do so many cuts to show a rocket going up? Wait a minute, how did when the lunar module or whatever was coming back from the moon, why was there another camera on the moon that was able to pan up? Oh, because they had a remote control back then that from Earth that they were able to pan up. Okay, and you can make a phone call to the moon at that time too, whatever, however millions of miles away it is. And my phone call gets dropped when I'm outside in a part of the neighborhood that I live in. And they even said, Neil Armstrong said that my phone or our phones have more technology, advanced technology in them compared to the computers that they used to get them on the moon. These are just questions. These are things to think about. And I bring all these things up because in Christopher Nolan's movies, he's using, as I said, the psychological mindset. He making movies about going to space, being literally a movie about NASA astronauts with Interstellar. So what you're seeing is showing literally our audience of, hey, this is what I can bring in the sense of our space travels. Do you believe it? Are you brought into the story? Do you believe it's real? Is your conscious able to detect that as just a movie or feeling like you're a part of really this new land that we've never been on, this new planet? And these are all things that they're doing and they're testing, they're gathering data here. And when I mean them, advertising companies, people connected, the ones that want the information. Just like when you go to Pandora, they're gathering information. What songs you like, what songs you don't like. Netflix, what movies you like, what movies you don't like. Let's give you recommendations. Always keeping you in that sense of being entertained, keeping you in the suggestive mindset. But those are with movies. Now you need it with events, life events. And people could be like, yo, you're crazy, all these things, but just take a second to think about these things. I'm not saying with certainty, but it's something to think about. We know that Stanley Kubrick filmed the last moon landing in a Hollywood basement. So clearly there's connection there. Look at his movie The Shining. Little kid wearing a NASA shirt. People are like, oh, well, he's just wearing a NASA shirt. Remember, they could be wearing any shirt. This kid could be wearing anything. And they picked a NASA shirt for The Shining. Let me see if I can pull that up. Let's see if I can do a screen share here. Hold on. I don't know if you can see me, but hold on. Give me a sec. Hold on. So I don't know if you can see it or not. Okay, I can't see it. All right, I'm not doing that. All right, so anyway, if you go on Google, you can go and see that the little boy, is wearing a NASA shirt in The Shining, which is made in the 70s, right after the moon landings, supposedly, allegedly. Why is he wearing a NASA shirt? As I said, you could be wearing anything. As a director, as a creator, you put what you want people to see in the shots, the story, the lines, the emotions. You're bringing those things to life. There's got to be a reason. You don't just, especially in a big time movie like that, you don't just go, oh, I just put him in that shirt. Not like that. You don't. Especially when you have a lot of money. So why do I keep bringing back Stanley Kubrick? Well, understanding. One of the big things that Christopher Nolan says in interviews is that he was very, very much inspired by old movies. One of them being 2001 Space Odyssey, which was done by Stanley Kubrick. So not that people who watch that movie are all connected, but clearly there's something that he liked about it. And the fact that he took NASA footage and supposedly spliced it and put his own stuff in there and no one said a thing about it, or NASA was like, cool, whatever. It's just a lot of these consistencies that are starting to get put together. And I'm not saying that they knew each other. I don't know. That I don't know. But knowing that there is a mantle that needs to be passed, they need to keep this lie afloat, because what happens when this lie goes out? Well, people, if we don't get if we never really went to the moon, then are we really on a spinning ball? What are we on? Who do I trust? These are people, these are lies that have been told time and time again. Oh my gosh, I can't trust anything. And it goes against the system. And that the system needs you, or Satan needs you, to follow. If you don't follow, well, where are you going? You know, for those who believe, like myself, you're finding your way towards God. In this understanding that we're not on the spinning ball, we're not in this infinite universe, and things are a lot closer. The sun, the moon, stars, sonoluminescence, all these different components. It's not a fiery ball in the sky. What we know is there's electricity involved a lot. Understanding batteries, anodes, cathodes, understanding that you have the atmosphere, water, the body of land, earth is your medium. All these different pieces that bring this together, and there's a lot of evidence and proof to show these things. So you need people in that world of entertainment and film to create the illusions to really bring you into the story in order to keep it alive. Because the story can only last for so long. Because as time goes on, more and more people start to understand truth. Truth will always overcome. Logos will always overcome. It just sometimes some of them last longer than others. Also, when you're dealing with people, people are flawed. So truths start to come to the surface. People slip up, they say things, they get older, they start to have dementia, some of them, or people find themselves in a conversation that may be recorded. You get people who just space out because they're human, they make mistakes. So when people say how many people, so many people would have to be in on these lies. Well, first off, people admit to lies. They just get glossed over it, because where you hear it or how then people talk about it later will start to call people who say anything against it, conspiracy theorists or this or that. And you then become this suggestive mindset of, oh, somebody is telling me that person's stupid for calling that out, therefore it's stupid. Because clearly the narrative that I'm being told is true. Not really willing to listen to other people. And these are things that I experience and I see a lot in my life. And no disrespect to people. It's just, these are things you start to see, you start to experience and witness. So as I'm talking about Christopher Nolan again, I know I've been jumping around. I know maybe this is getting a little long and dragged out, but I just want people understand that he has made these movies with purpose. Going back to the start, the movie that he had that got him on the map for the following was about a writer following people around trying to get a story that they were creating, and by doing so, basically found himself in trouble. The reason why I bring that up is because understanding the psyche of when we go down rabbit holes or we go to try to figure things out, you are going to deal with more conflicts because there's more truths that come to the surface. And it's going to be a challenge for people. But I also tell people when you are able to take on and follow yourself into these depths, it's more of a growing process. If you know you're not doing it alone, you have God, you have support, you're gonna be fine, you're gonna thrive. But where some of these movies are a little bit subverted is that they're not necessarily showing you that peace. It's always you have to do it on your own. It's just you. You don't have support here. And I think that's a big subversion because you're not. And I start with that because then ultimately that movie went to then Memento, the following, again, talking about going down rabbit holes, literally trying to figure stories out, understand the information, and finding yourself in certain cases, danger, despair, in corners that you don't know how to get out of. And then, so that was that movie. You now get to Memento, where the main character has what's called anterograde amnesia, which essentially just means after the trauma, the memory is lost. So whatever big trauma happened, like the car accident, all that memory that they have, they don't have memory. They forget things. They forget what happened right after or 20 seconds ago, or some people it's the day before. You saw it in the movie 50 First Dates with Ben Stiller, or not Ben Stiller, Adam Sandler and Drew Barrymore. Every day she'd wake up and she wouldn't remember everything, so they had to recreate the world, her world before her accident, to keep her in that place. But if they messed up or something changed and she found out, then they would be devastated. But ultimately, by the time she woke up the next day, she wouldn't remember any of it. And that's what this character is. It's this, played by Guy Pearce. He has this anterograde amnesia. And why is that important to our world? Well, think about when you have a stress or trauma, let's just say with the world we're living in now and what you're experiencing, how many people are traumatic? There's a traumatic response to what we're experiencing. And when also you're getting so much now in a traumatic mindset, so much information coming your way that's still traumatic, it's hard to process all that. So people literally in those moments have an amnesia. They forget. There's so many pieces that are being brought to them and they're forgetting everything. And I've said this in another video about symbols, is that's why symbols are so important, is we're dealing with so much information coming our way, and now we're becoming completely oblivious to a lot of it, and we don't even remember what we were fighting for or standing up for or questioning. But then we just need a symbol to remind us. Oh yeah, I do remember that. Oh my gosh, I was so mad about that. And it's the same thing with we were talking about the Batman movies. I said in the symbols, he's talking about how I'm just a man, Alfred. I'm just flesh and blood. I mean nothing. But it's the symbol. It's the symbol of the Batman. That's what's going to last forever. And as I said then, and I'll say now, it's a subversion. You as in the creation of God is enough. You have enough. You are perfect in the way you are. And it's the flaws that we create here on earth. It's the sins. It's these different components that mess with our psyche to make us feel that we're not. It's our disconnection with God, our higher power, or whatever, our source. And that's the thing is that when you're in that idea that we're in this continuous space, you lose sight of God for a lot of people in how close he is, or how close that connection is, and how it's in here. It's much closer than you realize. But the further we push you away and tell you that you're not enough in these movies, you're just the symbol of this alter ego of you, is what people need to see, not you as you, not the true self. That's not what's, in their minds, that's not what's important. And I think these are all these different pieces that fuck with people's minds. And you become in the suggestive state. You fall into this amnesia because of all the traumas in the world. You see the Batman movies and you see the anarchy and the chaos, and you think, oh man, this is what we're experiencing. Oh my gosh, I feel like what I watch is happening. Yeah, because it's a programming, but we set it up. We don't have to have it this way. But in order for us to do that, it needs to be able to, again, step within ourselves, find our reconnection with God. This is coming from someone who did not go to church, or when I did, it was only on the holidays. But it is learning how to, when you see the lies that are happening, specifically the big ones, you start to be able to go through your own phases of grief, of like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this. You're staying up late watching all these videos and reading and, hearing other people talking about it. You're like, am I crazy for thinking these things? But this doesn't make any sense. And these people are showing and logically showing that this doesn't make sense. And then you start getting angry. Why would these people do this? And then you start to go through the rage and the anger, and you go through these processes. But ultimately, when you understand that you have someone there with you, you have a guiding force, you realize you're not alone, and you realize there's nothing to be afraid of. So these truths that are being revealed aren't as scary, because oh my gosh, I have love, I have support. But when you don't allow yourself that, or you don't want to connect to those things, or as I said, you want to, as they said in The Prestige, you want to ignore the secret. You don't want to know the secret. You want to be in the story because it's easier, it's safer. These are things that I think are super important. And I think a lot of people can really gain a lot of growth from when you understand that someone like a Nolan, who people know him by name, people don't know a lot of directors, but they know him by name. He's telling these stories and he's showing you these things. He's explaining them in the characters. I mean, they said their movies was, inspired by Einstein, who theory of relativity. He's basing theories on top of theories, which means they aren't proven. Guy worked at a patent office. Think about that. He dealt personally, if this is really the person they say he is, he was dealing with other people's inventions, ideas. So he had relationships with family, like sexual relationships. And these are the people, and I'm not saying, shame on them for looking at it. I mean, clearly there's some inspiration, but it's also, hey, this is something that people are pushed. How many people are seeing Einstein in school? E equals MC squared symbol. That literally is a symbol for Einstein and this idea of space that we get pulled into. Also, in Nolan's movie, not only are they talking about Einstein and these theories of relativity and all these things, but they also, in The Prestige, have David Bowie play Nikola Tesla, who, if anyone knows about Nikola Tesla, even if he is really a person or it's just a character, go look into it. There's a lot there. There's a lot of good information worth looking into, questions that can come from it. But that's why I say these are characters, because do any of us really know them as an individual? No. Do we know what their life was really like, in the sense of the fame and the fortune, other than pictures? No, we don't. As I said before, you can see somebody and be like, oh, that person is the person in that movie that I saw, and I have this emotional reaction to them. And they're just like, dude, I'm not that. That's not me. I was just a character. Same thing with these people in the past, in our history. I just simply ask, could they be characters? If we don't know them, we have no relationship to them, Could they be a character? Could they be symbolic of something bigger? But we just need to put a face with it. These are just questions. Because sometimes if you have a really wild and outside idea, depends on whose mouth it's coming from or where it's coming from. Are people going to buy into it? Are people going to be invested? These are things to think about, because a lot of times you need someone to look the part. Tell me Einstein doesn't look the part or has created the part for scientists. Look at the movies and the shows and how people look, right? Look at Back to the Future. Crazy hair, white lab coat, even though Einstein really didn't wear lab coats. So these are all important aspects in understanding that, yes, is Christopher Nolan. I have no reason to doubt it. But is there a character that's being played? Does he have a role now on this bigger stage? Absolutely. What is his role? Well, he's making really good movies. He's just getting all these things out there. Possibly. That's one part of it. But what does that lead to? What events are we seeing in our lives? And what impact are they going to have? Who's involved? As I said before, Stanley Kubrick filmed the first moon landing. There's a good possibility that whenever this next mission that they're going to try to push, because they need people to keep investing, they need their money, they need their time, they need their energy, they need their frequency. Someone's got to film it. And in my opinion, I believe Ridley Scott and Christopher Nolan are going to have some role in that. If they're not directing it, they're going to be playing some part. As I said, with practical effects, budget, their way of telling stories, the stories that they're telling, literally, between the two of them, they made Interstellar and The Martian, about going to Mars and about going into a black hole, pushing the narrative in Interstellar that the reason why they have to go out there is because the world we live in is full of this blight and that we're destroying our own planet. Well, and the Dust Bowl. Let's talk about that. The big Dust Bowl from the 1930s. What caused it? They said, it was, what did they say? Something about just the weather changing, all these different pieces. It was poor soil, poor farming techniques. What was also happening? Mass agriculture. These fields that they were trying to mass produce on. And when you have people who don't know what they're doing, understanding that when you reuse soil after a certain amount of time, if you don't properly, shift your crops and doing things in ways that are move with nature, you're going to destroy the soil. And that's what you saw. And that's the thing is so same thing with blight. What causes blight? Poor soil. When you don't tend to your soil. A lot of these big manufacturings, mass productions, a lot of them don't handle their soil well. So what we're experiencing, or in that movie, they're saying, oh, this is what we're doing. This is what we're doing to our planet. We're global warming, or whatever the case is. It's like, no, you're just not taking care of your soil, because we're just consumers. We don't look after our own soil. We don't think about it ourselves, a lot of us. And I think that's a sign for us to go, hey, let's look into our own soil. Let's take things into our own hands, understanding that we don't need to try to go into this black hole to find new life. There's plenty here. There's abundance on this land. The shortages are only there because a lot of us aren't giving back to it. We're just consuming. And they're showing those in those movies of like, oh, you need to be fearful because these dust bowls and blight and, let's go to another planet. That's what we're experiencing right now. These movies are so on point. We need to go to another planet. Oh, look, in the news they're talking about us going to another planet. What a coincidence. Oh, how convenient is that? And yeah, we're going back. This is happening. Or is it that that's being pushed? That's the entertainment. That's the holding in the mind and putting in the suggestive programming. And as I said, who's doing it? Who are the players? And one of the big players that I'm seeing right now is Christopher Nolan. And just like now talking about another movie that has nothing to do with him, as I said in another video, Wag the Dog. with Dustin Hoffman and Robert De Niro. They talk about um, Dustin Hoffman character is angry because he wants the attention. They create a false flag, and he wants the glory for it. He wants people to know that he produced it. He produced the false flag. He brought that into people's minds and sold them. And if you think about that, that's them saying literally, we created this false flag. We're creating this illusion. We're creating this spell. And now in that case, they want the attention. A lot of these big ones, like the Stanley Kubrick, a lot of people didn't know. Over time, again, things reveal themselves. Truths come to the surface. I'm not saying I know that, like I said, Christopher Nolan's going to actually do it, or Ridley Scott, or whatever the case is. But just based off of his past, his upbringing, his history, um, and also just obviously coming out of the main stage with his brother and the relationships and the stories that they're telling, and big production companies are allowing them to tell. There's a reason for it, because if it was going against what the studio heads wanted, they wouldn't let that come. They wouldn't let people watch that. They would say, Christopher, you're going to do another film for us. Don't do that one. Can you do one about this? Yeah, I can do one about that. Or, hey, what do you guys think about this? Well, what's the message we're going to tell the people? These are important aspects, and understanding that you don't just go to a place and say, hey, this is the story I want to tell. They're going to, at a certain point, go, we're going to tell this story too. Make it fit. Find a way to get it in there. Because that's just the nature of it. But it's something to be afraid about. It's just paying attention to it and understanding that, okay, this is what's happening. This is what's out there. Another fun fact, I'm jumping around and I'm going to be done after this because I'm exhausted. His brother, Jonah Nolan, his wife, I forget her name, but she works on, she's one of the creators of Westworld, which is another big show about this dystopia of technology coming in, and the reality of what's technology, what's real, what's this, and understanding that they're trying to push that all of these robots are going to come in, this AI. Well, think about that. Two families, or the Nolans and then his wife and Emma Thomas, all these people are literally pushing out to the world these stories about affecting people's psyche and the mind, and what to believe, what's real, what's not real, and putting people in this, basically, this syncope, this loss of blood pressure, because you don't know what's real, what's not. I don't know how to handle any of this. So your blood pressure goes down, you lose some consciousness. Now you're in this like daze. Literally syncope Inc. You're in this daze. You're basically like this dead entity just walking through life, not knowing how to find yourself in this world. Your conscious is so discombobulated all the time. There's people like Inception, movies, media coming in, planting these ideas in your mind. You're watching Westworld, where I've never seen it, but based on what I think is happening, you're now seeing a world where people don't know if the person they're looking at is a robot or a human being, a living being. And you're seeing how that's affecting people's lives in the world that they're living in. But I don't think that we're going to have those types of robots, guys. I don't. I really think, and I just, from other people talking, and I sat with it, and I thought it made a lot of sense, is that when we find ourselves with people who are constantly in a daze, always in a suggestive state, you become like a robot, because you're just taking in and going, yes, I will do that. I will think that way. If I think anything else, I go against everybody else. You become the robot, essentially. And this is why it's important for us to speak our mind, think outside the box, ask questions. Because if we're constantly just the person going, yes, I agree, I don't want to cause a trouble, I don't want people to look at me, I don't want the attention, let me stare at this screen, let me not look anywhere else, let me not, let me only show my emotion when everyone else has that emotion. You're not thinking for yourself. And I ask people, do you live for you? Do you live for knowing that you have a higher purpose. Some people don't know. Some people don't care. Fine, you don't have to answer, but for anyone, I'm asking, do you know that your purpose? Do you have a higher purpose that you're looking for? Do you ask questions about the world you live in? Are you curious? One of the biggest things that I'm looking forward to with my little guy is him just asking why. One thing that parents hate, a lot of people are like, oh, he just doesn't stop. I'm not saying it's not going to be exhausting at times, but it's going to be interesting to hear him ask why, because it means he's going to have wonder and curiosity. And if I say just because, it just is, well, what am I doing? What am I helping? Let's build that wonder. Let's ask questions. If things don't make sense, don't just be like, oh, well, I don't know. I'm stupid. Leave it to the scientists. Leave it to these people. A lot of those people are only doing well because they're well funded. We say, hey, leave it to the person who knows what they're talking about. Well, that person's also just like a movie producer or a director. They're also the ones getting the paychecks. Hey, you tell our story that we want, we'll give you that money and we'll give you more money. Just tell the story. It's no different, guys. It's all the same. Anybody, as you get higher up and you become more of that name, you are going to catch not just the people's attention, but you're going to catch the attention of people who want to see you do what they need you to do because they know you have people's minds. They know you have entertained. So that just comes with the territory. Look at people who are on social media and influencers. They're selling brands and products. They're, I don't know if any of you know anybody like that, but I can almost imagine they're also having to do things that they don't want to do. But it's their managers, it's their agents. They're telling them, hey, you guys have to do this. So, and I know people in that world that do have to do those things that they don't want to do to some extent. But this is just the part that I'm ultimately getting across is the higher you go up, the more attention you get, the more somebody's ultimately having you push things as well. And if you're good at what you do, they're going to give you more attention. They're going to give you more limelight. They're going to give you more money. They're going to give you more of those things in the material world that people become sinful over. And if you don't have a foundation to go to, God, family, community, all these friends, what you end up having is yourself lost. That's why you see people with all this money in the world, all this glory and success, materially speaking. A lot of times, not all of them, but a lot of them feel alone, feel disconnected to people. They feel they don't have anybody. They feel depressed. And I ask the question why. I can't speak for them, but a lot of them do, from what they've said, from what I've heard. So it's just these are things to think about. And I know I'm jumping on tangents here, but as I said, I do believe, based off of everything I said today, that Christopher Nolan is going to have a play in some sort of, I believe, Mars or moon landing talk, and what you're seeing in all the news articles now with space related. I think he's going to have a role. Maybe director, maybe just part of the creative team. I don't know. But these are things that are seeming more and more evident to me based off of just being an observer. So anyway, I know this was long. I know I dragged on, but I hope you enjoyed it. Have a wonderful rest of your night. And until next time, have a good night.